I want to welcome you all to Warren Rifles Confederate Memorial Museum. And Jeffrey Hunt has been here twice before. We are proud to have him to talk about his new book, Meade and Lee at Rappahannock Station. And there's going to be a fourth one. So I will turn it over to Mr. Hunt.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out. As Suzanne said, what I'm going to talk about tonight is the latest book in my Meade and Lee series, where I've been examining that part of the Civil War in Virginia that always got forgotten about, between Lee's recrossing the Potomac after the Battle of Gettysburg and the start of the Overland Campaign in the spring of 1864. Because that second half of 1863 didn't produce a great big battle like Chancellorsville or Fredericksburg, historians essentially hit the fast forward button. Let's get to the Overland Campaign and the Battle of Wilderness. We'll go pay attention to what's going on around Chattanooga. But of course, the war did not go on hiatus in those 6 months after Gettysburg. In fact, a great deal happened. And when you begin to look into the period, you realize just how much happened, how dramatic it was. And of course, it was a period of the war that people actually lived through. Soldiers fought, died, were wounded, families lost loved ones. And this period actually sets the stage for the Overland Campaign. So it's very, very important. The first book in the series, Meade and Lee after Gettysburg, looks at the 2 weeks is right after Lee crosses the Potomac, and the duel between Meade and Lee on either side of the Blue Ridge Mountains as Lee tries to get himself back into Culpeper County, and Meade tries unsuccessfully to stop him. The second book deals with August, September, and October, which were highlighted by the Bristow Station campaign, and the subject tonight is the fighting at Rappahannock Station and Kelly's Ford at the very beginning of November 1863, which represents the first true offensive movement of the Army of the Potomac by General Meade since he had taken command on the eve of the Battle of Gettysburg. And so this is a relatively brief campaign, but it is a very dramatic campaign that will then set into place the elements that will give you the Mine Run campaign at the end of November, the beginning of December 63, which will be the subject of the last book in the series, Meade and Lee at Mine Run. And so here is where we start off. After the Battle of Bristow Station, Robert E. Lee knows that Meade has fallen back to the defenses around Centerville and Fairfax Courthouse. He could outflank him one more time by slipping into the Loudoun Valley, but that would just put Meade into the defenses of Washington, where the Confederate Army wouldn't be able to hurt him. And although Lee would have liked to have stayed near the Potomac during the winter of 1863, he knew this was logistically impossible. That part of Virginia has been devastated by 2 years of war. The armies have eaten it out. Most of the civilians have had to flee, and those who have stayed behind are barely eking out an existence. And the Confederate supply system is too anemic to keep his army fed and his animals fed so far away from Richmond. And so Lee rather reluctantly decides that he's going to have to pull back behind the upper Rappahannock River, retreat at least as far as Culpeper County, in order to keep Meade from launching a rapid pursuit and hopefully to prevent the Federals from launching another campaign in 1863. As the rebels pulled back, they destroyed the Orange and Alexandria Railroad. And this is a picture of that devastation right there. They pulled up all the track, piled the cross ties, set them afire, laid the tracks on top of them, warped them into uselessness. They chopped down all the telegraph poles. They carried off the telegraph wire. They burned all the station houses. They wrecked every bridge and every culvert for something like 25 miles. And the Federals who would follow in the Army of Northern Virginia's wake commented universally that they'd never seen anything so thoroughly destroyed, obliterated as the Orange and Alexandria Railroad by Lee's army. And what this means is that Meade cannot follow Lee very quickly because the Orange and Alexandria is his only supply line. and it's a single track line, and everything the Army of the Potomac needs in terms of munitions and clothing and shoes, but especially food and forage, has to come down that railroad. And so he can only pursue Lee at the pace of the railroad repair crews. Now, the Yankees are going to be able to put that railroad back in operation in about 3.5 weeks, which is faster than the Confederates had anticipated, but that's 3.5 weeks of good weather. And you're heading toward November and December, where it gets pretty dicey in Northern Virginia, and once the rains and the snow starts moving, armies becomes exceptionally difficult. And so this is essentially, Lee was trying to run out the clock in 1863, but the Federals are able to move a little bit faster than he would prefer for them to move. And so at the end of October of 1863, this is where the two armies are. The red circles are the Confederates, the blue squares are the Federals. These represent mostly corps, sometimes division and brigade, so that we can see that here is the upper Rappahannock River, and Lee has pulled his troops back into Culpeper County. The Federals have gotten their railroad repairs all the way to Warrenton Junction, so the Army of the Potomac is basically on a line between Warrenton up here, Warrenton Junction on the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, with their cavalry forward deployed toward the Rappahannock. And the question now is, what is Meade going to do? And for Meade, this is not altogether that easy a question to answer, because he does not want to be operating on the Orange and Alexandria Railroad. He wound up there by chance after the Gettysburg campaign had concluded. He was willing to push down the railroad and see how far Lee might back up with a Gettysburg battered army, but when Lincoln brought him to a halt at the beginning of August of '63 and took 10,000 of his troops away to go and enforce the draft in the north, Meade had been left cooling his heels on the upper Rappahannock, and both his and Lee's armies had had plenty of time to recover from the Gettysburg campaign. And so the idea of continuing to push down the Orange and Alexandria Railroad is got to be viewed through a different set of circumstances after August of 1863. And there are two primary problems with using the Orange and Alexandria as an axis of advance for the Union Army. One of them is that the railroad slides away from Richmond. So it's 100 miles of track, starts in Alexandria on the Potomac, goes down to Culpeper Courthouse, and then it heads south until it gets to Gordonsville and links up with the Virginia Central Railroad that connects essentially Richmond to the Shenandoah Valley. That's a vital Confederate supply artery, but that is the only strategic objective that you would be heading toward if you advance down the Orange and Alexandria. And the difficulty with doing an advance here is that Lee can simply back up in front of you. He doesn't have to stand and fight. And the other difficulty is, and these two reinforce each other, is that this entire railroad, of course, runs through Confederate territory. It runs through Mosby's Confederacy. And so there is always the possibility that Confederate raiders can disrupt the railroad. They can tear up track, they can burn bridges, they can destroy culverts. How do you keep the rebels from doing that? You have to station a lot of infantry along this line. In fact, at this period of the war, there's an entire division of the Army of the Potomac that is assigned the job of doing nothing but guarding that railroad. And that means one less division to throw into the next battle. And one of the things that Meade is aware of is that every battle is bigger than the battle before it and bloodier than the battle before it. And the Army of the Potomac, which had numbered well in excess of 100,000 men on the peninsula and at Chancellorsville, is now down to around 88,000 men. And Meade knows that the 3-year enlistments are going to expire in the spring. If those men do what the 2-year men did and they go home, then the Army of the Potomac is going to shrink. Even though the battles are getting bigger and they're getting bloodier, he has no confidence that the draft is going to replace that Union manpower whatsoever. And so he believes that he has to be very careful with his manpower. We're used to thinking that the North has this enormous manpower advantage, and in fact it does. And it plays out very importantly at the end of the war. But at this stage of things, in the second half of 1863, Meade does not know that that is what's going to happen. He has no confidence that this is what's going to happen. And he expects that in the next fight, the Confederates will dig in. He'll have to attack entrenchments, which means he's going to need a lot more manpower if he has any hope of being successful. And even if he were to win a battle, if all that battle does is back the Confederates up to the next river line, 20 or 25 miles in the rear, what have you accomplished? And so Meade believes that in the next fight, he has to have enough men to win. He's not sure he's got them. And that the next battle, he has to accomplish something decisive. He can't play a game of attrition against Lee. And this is another reason why the Orange in Alexandria is such a bad idea, because if you keep going south and Lee just backs up in front of you, you spread more Union troops out to defend that railroad. Lee's shortening his line of supply. As he goes backwards, he gets stronger. As Meade goes forward, he gets weaker. Lee will find a great spot to turn, stand, and fight, and it's unlikely that the Union wins that battle. Meade would have to retreat. Maybe he loses his army. Are you going to take that chance? And George Meade doesn't want to take that chance. He believes that this is a fruitless line of advance. He also knows, however, that Lincoln and Halleck have been telling him, they've been telling all the Union generals since 1862, Richmond's not your objective, Lee's army is your objective. Go out and destroy Lee's army. Well, that's good advice, and it makes sense, but there's one problem with it. You can't destroy Lee's army if Lee won't stand and fight in a place where his army can be destroyed. You've got to force Lee to make a stand someplace where he's going to be at a disadvantage, and the only way you can do that is threaten something that he absolutely has to defend, and the only thing that he absolutely has to defend is Richmond. So if you're not threatening Richmond, you can't force Lee into a battle that he doesn't want to fight. And so General Meade believes that the smartest move would be to send his army to Fredericksburg. Use the Potomac as his line of supply down to Aquia Landing, and then the railroad to Fredericksburg. It's only a half dozen or a dozen miles long. Don't have to use very many troops to supply it. You're on a straight path to Richmond. Lee has to stand and fight. And so he does not want to move into Culpeper County again, especially after his Bristow Station experience, where he went into Culpeper County, and then Lee found it very easy to outflank him and drive him back virtually to the defenses of Washington at the beginning of October. So Meade, standing at Warrenton, looks at his option, and he's basically got three. He could move directly at the Rappahannock River, behind which the Army of Northern Virginia is located, and all of its crossings are fortified. That seems like a very unattractive option. Having to fight your way over the river might not work, will be bloody. What do you gain? You maybe push the Confederates behind the Rapidan, another heavily defended river that then you have to cross. Second option, swing west into Madison County and either try and get below the Rapidan before Lee can intercept you, or swing in from the open end of the Culpeper V, which is formed by the upper Rappahannock and the Rapidan, looks like a sideways V, and hit him from the west. But the difficulty of doing this is you have to detach from the Orange and Alexandria. You march away from your railroad supply line. You're going to have to use wagons to fill the gap. That's going to slow you down. Those wagons are going to be vulnerable to Confederate attack. So this doesn't look like a good option at all. Therefore, Meade prefers the idea of quickly marching to the southeast to Fredericksburg. And this is exactly what Burnside decided to do in November of 1862 when the armies were essentially in the same place. The upper Rappahannock has all of its high ground basically on the north bank. If you control the north bank of the river, you can maneuver without the Confederates seeing you. So you move quickly, you get to Fredericksburg, you cross the river there, Lee has to retreat to get between you and Richmond, and therefore you don't have to fight your way over the upper Rappahannock, you don't have to fight your way over the Rapidan. You achieve all of this without casualties. And you give yourself a shorter, more secure line of supply back to the Potomac. And as far as Meade is concerned, therefore, this is the most logical move. You'll have to move fast, and you'll have to move with secrecy, but he believes he can do that, and he's also prepared not to have the same thing happen that happened to Burnside, and that's the pontoon bridges to cross the Rappahannock at Fredericksburg don't show up. He's going to make sure they're there. And so he thinks that this is the best move. And he's been back and forth with Lincoln and Halleck all through September and October about what can he do, what should he do. They haven't been very helpful, but they vetoed this plan once before. But he thinks that after the Bristow Station campaign, they're willing to listen to him because he had proven, or Lee had proven for him, that going into Culpeper County was not the best, smartest move. It's too easy to be outflanked and forced back to Washington. So Meade actually begins to put his plan into motion, expecting that Lincoln is going to approve it. Now, part of Meade's calculations are based on what Lee is thinking about doing. And for Lee, he's got a sort of different set of problems. One of those problems is the fact that his army right now is in Culpeper County. But Culpeper County is no better a place for the Confederates to be than it is for the Federals. If you are launching an offensive as a Confederate, Culpeper's great because there's all sorts of access to the gaps in the mountains. You can either swing into the Loudoun Valley or get into the Shenandoah, drive north. But if you're on the defensive, Culpeper is problematic because inside Culpeper County, inside that Culpeper V as I call it, there's no really good defensive terrain. It's beautiful, but those open rolling hills, those occasional forests don't offer you any place to firmly anchor a battle line on both flanks. In addition to that, if you travel down the Orange and Alexandria Railroad between Rappahannock Station, where the railroad crosses the upper Rappahannock, and Rapidan Station, where it crosses the Rapidan, it's only 23 miles. It's a very small space. You fight a battle inside the Culpeper V, your back is to a river. And although these rivers are not especially wide and they're not especially deep, their banks are difficult, and although there are lots of fords, one good rain and those fords disappear. And those fords, of course, become funnels for a retreating army that slow you down but enable a pursuing enemy to potentially catch you and maul you. And so Meade had not decided to fight in Culpeper County in October for good reasons. Lee had decided not to make a stand in Culpeper County in August after Gettysburg for the same reasons. But when he comes back from Bristow, he decides to stay there, at least for a time. He doesn't want to give up any more Virginia than the Federals are going to make him give up. That's an extra 25 miles of cushion between the Army of the Potomac and Richmond. But it does have this problem that all the high ground is on the north bank, and therefore the fords here are almost indefensible, no matter how many fortifications the Confederates throw up at them. And if the Federals get across the ford, they force Lee to fight a battle inside the Culpeper V. That's just not a very good place to be. Alternatively, he could do what he did in August, and that's pull back behind the Rapidan, which is a much easier to defend river because all the high ground is on the south bank. The enemy now has the problem of being struck from higher elevations. But there's difficulty here too, because if he gives up Culpeper County, he can't defend the entire Rapidan line. If he bases his army supplies at Orange Courthouse, which is really the only place that you can do it, and he spreads regiments out for a distance of 25 miles on either side of Orange, he still can't guard the fords near where the Rapidan flows into the Rappahannock. Germanna Ford, Ely's Ford are going to be open. And nothing but Confederate cavalry patrols there to keep an eye on things, which means that if the Federals move fast, they could cross the river there, get on Lee's right flank, and then they have the option of doing one of two things. They can turn west and drive against his army and try and destroy it before he can concentrate it, or, more worrisome, they can keep marching south, get through the wilderness, head towards Spotsylvania Courthouse, and try and get between Lee and Richmond. And the only Confederate response at that point is to quickly concentrate and move down the Orange Turnpike and the Orange Plank Road to hit the Federals before they can fulfill either one of those missions. This is, if you're familiar with the Battle of the Wilderness, exactly what's going to happen. If you're familiar with Mine Run, this is similar to what's going to happen, but Lee doesn't like it because it puts him in a reactive stance. He has to wait for the enemy to make the move, and then he has to move fast and be able to concentrate, or things are going to go very badly. So Lee would rather stay in Culpeper County. In Culpeper County, he's got some advantages. He's got interior lines, so if the Federals try and swing west into Madison County, he can march up to meet them and cut them off, hit them as they're leaving their railroad supply line behind. Alternatively, if the Federals don't do that, then they've got two options, and Meade knows what they are, and Lee knows what they are. You can assail the Confederate defenses along the Rappahannock, or you can march toward Fredericksburg. How does Lee deal with that? He comes up with an innovative answer. He fortifies a bridgehead on the north bank of the Rappahannock at a place called Rappahannock Station. Not a huge fortification, not especially stout fortification. When we think of Civil War fortifications, we all remember the Brady pictures from Petersburg, and that's not. This is a little more than field fortifications, but it's not siege-style fortifications. But as long as he's got that bridgehead there, and it's on the north bank of the river, he presents Meade with a problem. Because if the Confederates are here and Meade tries to go toward Fredericksburg, Lee could attack out of that bridgehead to get behind Meade and between the Army of the Potomac and Washington, which of course Meade cannot let happen. Meade would have to turn around and try and drive the Confederates off the Orange and Alexandria. Lee would pick his ground. John Pope had done this. It didn't work very well. He doesn't want to make that same mistake. So if Lee is here at Rappahannock Station, he's voided any chance of the Federals going to Fredericksburg, and that means that they're going to have to attack the river line. And if they attack the river line, they're going to want more than one place to cross. And the easiest place for the Federals to cross is down here at Kellysville, Kelly's Ford. The ground north of Kelly's Ford, technically east at that point, much higher than on the south bank. There's no way the Confederates could defend it. But as Lee's thinking this through, that's actually to his advantage, because Meade is going to have to screen or try to take the Confederate defenses at Rappahannock Station. And if he's got to do that, and he tries to cross his army at Kelly's Ford, he has to divide his force. He has to divide his force. And that's exactly what Lee wants him to do. So one part of the Army of the Potomac is here dealing with the fortifications at Rappahannock Station, which Lee figures can stymie them for maybe a day and a half. The other half he will let cross at Kelly's Ford. Can't really stop them anyway, but that's fine, because he's got to let them come into Culpeper County, get a few miles from the river, and then he's going to concentrate his army to a counterattack and destroy that half of the Union Army. So this is a very typical Robert E. Lee way of thinking. He's technically on the defensive, but he's going to organize his defense in such a way that he can go over to the tactical offensive. He's going to be the guy calling the shots, not Meade. Does Meade understand what that fortification at Rappahannock Station means? He absolutely does. That's why he doesn't want to go this way. He's going to gamble. I can get to Fredericksburg before Lee can counterattack out of Rappahannock Station. And once I'm in Fredericksburg, Lee has no choice but to retreat and get between me and Richmond. So both generals believe that they've come up with a good plan. Jefferson Davis is going to rubber stamp anything that Robert E. Lee wants to do. Gettysburg hasn't changed that at all. George Meade, well, his relationship with Abraham Lincoln is, shall we say, not as robust. The business at Williamsport, where Lee had gotten away from the Army of the Potomac and crossed back into Virginia, Lincoln has forgiven that, but he has not forgotten that. And he believes that Meade lacks aggressiveness, he lacks killer instinct. He's not a bad general, but he's not the kind of general that Abraham Lincoln really wants. And Henry Halleck, of course, is an echo of Abraham Lincoln in this regard. And when Meade sends in his plan, I'm going to go to Fredericksburg, assuming that this time it will be approved, the day afterwards he gets the, to him, very shocking order that says, no, you're not going to Fredericksburg. We're not going to change the base of the Army of the Potomac to a Key Landing. This move is disapproved. And this makes Meade very angry. He writes to his wife, my plan is disapproved. That's his capitalization. Great, big, bold letters. And that infuriates me, because militarily, his move toward Fredericksburg is the best move. It's the move that makes sense. He can't believe that he's not going to be allowed to make it, especially since the other two options are not very appealing whatsoever. And Meade's really beside himself. Lincoln and Halleck have been saying, you decide what to do. And as many times as Meade has said, give me advice, give me instructions, and they won't give it to him. Well, now he turns around and says, okay, I've decided. And they say, well, you can't decide that. You can't decide that. Of course, Meade's plan would have been risky. It might not have worked any better than Burnside's attempt to essentially do the same thing. But here's one of the components of this plan that Meade doesn't seem to understand, is that taking the Army of the Potomac back to the scene of its worst defeat almost exactly a year after that disaster is politically a non-starter for the Lincoln administration. Even though they've gotten past the 63 congressional elections, this would just smack of strategic bankruptcy. So Meade's very angry, he's very disappointed in what's happened, but he is a dutiful soldier. And if his plan is disapproved, it's disapproved. He's going to go to plan B, which is to do, and he knows this, exactly what Robert E. Lee wants him to do. And that's attack the upper Rappahannock and divide his army in the process into two wings. Major General John Sedgwick is going to be given the 5th and the 6th Corps, 26,000 men with their attendant artillery, and told to attack Rappahannock Station. Major General William French, these are the two senior corps commanders in the Army of the Potomac, is going to be given the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Corps, 29,000 men, and told to cross the river at Kelly's Ford. Understanding the danger that Rappahannock Station represents, Meade knows, he's calculated, he's figured it out, the only way to undercut Lee's plan of defense is to take Rappahannock Station very quickly, so that Sedgwick can cross there at the same time that French is crossing at Kelly's Ford, concentrate the two halves of the Union Army at Brandy Station before Lee can counterattack and destroy the army while it's divided. So, very risky. Meade's not sure that the defenses at Rappahannock Station can be overwhelmed in a frontal attack, but this is now the game that he's going to have to play. So his plan, as good a plan as he can come up with at this point, is to move two columns, the 5th and the 6th Corps toward Rappahannock Station, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd toward Kelly's Ford, and try and get over the river simultaneously at 2 points. Meade's army is close enough now that it can get to the Rappahannock in about half a day. Mm-hmm.
What are the numbers for the Confederate Army at this
55,000.
Okay.
So remember, Longstreet's corps has gone west. So Meade outnumbers Lee almost 1.5 to 1. So not enormous odds. And this is, of course, part of Meade's worry. And of that, the way that Meade calculates this, it's not total Union strength versus total Confederate strength. It's infantry strength versus infantry strength. And the Confederate Army has a much higher proportion of infantry than the Union Army does, because he's got all of this artillery. Meade thinks he has way more artillery than he actually needs, and so you take 4,000 or 5,000 guys who are in the reserve artillery that you hardly ever get to use on a battlefield, deduct them, and then deduct all those guys defending the railroad. Infantry to infantry, Meade doesn't have the kind of preponderance of strength that would guarantee success. So everything is a roll of the dice. Thank you for reminding me to point that out. All right?
Is General French the same General French?
Yes.
That was at
Wapping
the-
Heights.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Same guy. So that is Meade's plan. It's as good a plan as you're going to come up with, and he's going to execute it very well. The march of the federal troops is going to be fast, and it's going to be efficient, and it's going to take Lee by surprise. Not in the sense that Meade is going to do something Lee doesn't expect him to do. Meade is in fact doing exactly what Lee wants him to do, but because the Confederate cavalry is behind the upper Rappahannock, it can't keep an eye on the Federals. Lee doesn't know that the Yankees were about to move, and on November 1st, one of his best spies had been captured by the Federals. And that's a little thing, but it means that the word that the Yankees are about to move doesn't get to Lee. Mm-hmm. So when the Federals move, that's actually, tactically, it's going to catch the Confederates a little bit off guard. Not decisively so, but the Confederates are flat-footed when Meade makes this advance. What's Meade's mindset as he undertakes this operation? Well, here is a letter to his wife, Margaret, that he writes on the eve of the advance, on November 6th. He hasn't written her a whole lot since the Bristow campaign. Very unlike him. He's a one letter a day kind of guy, and he hasn't been writing. And he wants to explain that to her. He's kind of apologizing, but basically he's telling her, I am so stressed out. I am so anxious. I am so distraught that I'm in no condition to write. And I try not to write. I try not to think about this stuff. But now, on the eve of a battle, he's gonna tell her what he thinks. He says, a hopeful dependence on God's mercy that in time all will come right is all that supports me in the trying and difficult position I now occupy. Prohibited from doing what my judgment dictates, at the same time held responsible that something should be done, and what to be done as usual left to my judgment. So Lincoln and Halleck have said, do something, decide what you want to do. I decided. They said no. I have to do something else. And yet it's still on me. I find myself in a most embarrassing position. Tomorrow I should make a movement and attempt to force the passage of the Rappahannock. But from previous experience in such operations, read Fredericksburg, I'm not overly sanguine of success. This is, however, the only practicable movement I can make, and if it fails, I have done all that can be done. Although, of course, I expect to be held responsible for the consequences if they should prove unfortunate. And then he complains that the Philadelphia newspapers are saying that he's in trouble in Washington for retreating at Bristow, and he's been told if you don't make a movement, an offensive movement, you're going to be fired, and that's why I'm going to do it. That's not true. No such orders, no such threat has been made, but you can't trust the press. They're going to lie, and he hates the press for it. There's a sentence we all might sort of say nothing's changed. I presume truthfulness is not to be expected nowadays from the press. History repeats itself. No. And then he gets down to it. I am in such a mental condition that I'm not fit to write. Indeed, I try to avoid writing as much as possible. You're greatly mistaken, however, you suppose that I don't think about you. I miss my children. I miss you. It's all that kind of keeps me going at this point, is the thought that one day I will be able to come back to you. And then this very telling passage. I thought before I was assigned to the command of this army that I had a pretty fair idea of the position. But the reality has gone far beyond my wildest expectations, and bitterly have I regretted I did not absolutely and firmly decline from the first. I accepted, however, from a sense of duty and in obedience to an order, and I shall continue to discharge my duties in the same spirit, honestly trying to do the best I can and prepared to submit with the same cheerfulness to the order relieving me, which I gave to the one placing me in command. Meade has on several occasions either demanded to be removed from command of the Army of the Potomac or offered to have himself removed if Lincoln and Halleck aren't happy with him. And that offer has always been rebuffed. But now Meade is just basically telling his wife, I am so sorry I have this job. It is far worse than I thought that it was. I am miserable. And now I'm being forced into an operation that is of dubious validity. And if it goes wrong, I'm going to be blamed. I'm going to be fired, even though I'm not doing what I think I ought to be doing. Not the best mindset for a general who's launching a tricky offensive the very next day. But the offensive is launched, and the first fighting is going to take place at Kellysville, which is next to Kelly's Ford, on the eastern side of Culpeper County. And the Confederates here are at a severe disadvantage because all the high ground is on the Yankee side of the river. And they are aware of that, and they deployed their forces reasonably in the face of that. Most of the Confederate troops are a mile or more back from the river. But as a tripwire, they have fortified Kelly's Ford, and they've got advanced troops from Rhodes' Brigade out here in the woods behind Kelly's Ford. At the fort itself, 7 companies of the 2nd North Carolina under Lieutenant Colonel William Stallings, just 225 men. He's got companies up here at Wheatley's Ford and down here at Ellis Ford as well. Backing him up, the 30th North Carolina, Lieutenant Colonel William Sellers with 500 men, and the Fluvanna artillery, which rather atypically of the Confederates is a 6-gun, not a 4-gun battery. But these men, under the command of Colonel Cox, who's the brigade commander, because Stephen Dotson Ramseur, whose brigade this actually is, has gone home to get married. So he's busy elsewhere. and Cox is in command. They are not supposed to hold this forward against anything except a light attack. They're there to delay, buy us a couple hours, sound the alarm, allow Rhodes' division to form up and block a Yankee advance too far inland, while Johnson's division rushes over to reinforce you. Hold the Yankees close to the river, see what's going on at Rappahannock Station, concentrate the rest of the army, and overwhelm whatever's crossed the river at Kelly's Ford. So this is a delaying force. And that means that French, who's coming at them with 29,000 men, shouldn't have too much trouble. And especially the way that this fight plays out. So the Federals advance infantry toward the ford. They run into Confederate skirmishers. The alarm is sounded. Word begins to go back into Culpeper County that the Federals suddenly are approaching the upper Rappahannock in great strength. So the guys at Kelly's Ford have basically done the critical job here. The Yankees get artillery on the high ground overlooking the river. And so you can see right down here, that's Kelly's Ford, right down there. And this is the woods where the Confederate infantry is, and this is where the Confederate artillery, the Fluvanna artillery, goes into action. You can see the enormous advantage the Yankees have here. It's basically like shooting fish in a barrel, right? And once those guns are in place and they're firing, the Confederates inside Kellysville and Kelly's Ford are essentially cut off. They're not going to be able to get away without running through a gauntlet of Federal fire. And so, although it takes a couple hours for all the parts and pieces to fall into place, this is a foregone conclusion. The Confederates stall the Federals for a time because none of the Federal soldiers are particularly anxious to try and ford the river in the face of Confederate rifle fire. The 30th North Carolina, Colonel Sillers makes a bad decision, and he tries to reinforce Kelly's Ford by moving a line of battle 700 yards across broken terrain in the face of all this Yankee artillery fire. The regiment's broken completely up before it can get into the town, and once it's there, most of its men go hide in cellars and basements because they're so demoralized, they're not really going to contribute anything to the defense, at which point Stallings tells Sellers, get your men out of here, you're useless to me. And most of them do make the dash back, but about 200 of them refuse to leave. They're not going to run the risk of being killed in a retreat after what they've just been through. The Fluvanna artillery comes out, occupies a pre-dug earthwork, puts up a brief and gallant fight, but there are 3 Federal batteries of rifled guns deployed against their 6. That's an unequal contest, and after firing only 10 rounds per gun, its commander says, we got to get out of here or we're going to be shot to pieces. And so the 2nd North Carolina is left here alone. The Federals send the 1st U.S. sharpshooters down to take the ford. 4 companies outflank the Confederates, and although they take some damage crossing the river, they get across, and then the main column comes over. Alfred Wode's with them. He draws it. And the Yankees capture Kelly's Ford fairly easily. The casualties for the Confederates there, 45 dead, 78 wounded, 295 missing. Most of them from the 30th North Carolina because they refused to retreat. When the 2nd North Carolina bugged out once the ford was lost, and most of them got away, but a good chunk of the 30th North Carolina gets captured in Kellysville. And so at the cost of 7 dead, 35 wounded, French has Kelly's Ford, begins to lay the pontoon bridges, starts crossing his infantry over. Now this is in the afternoon of November 7th because it took the first half of the day for the Federals to march from their starting point to the Rappahannock, but French is on schedule, doing exactly what he's supposed to do. If Meade was uncertain about his ability to run a corps after the Battle of Wapping Heights in late July of 1863, this sort of mollifies things a little bit. And for French is performing well, probably for the last time in his military career, but he is performing well. And that means that all of the attention now switches over to Rappahannock Station. A.P. Hill's Corps is the reserve corps. And so it's Richard Ewell's corps that is in charge of all the defenses of the river. And he's got Rhodes and Johnston basically prepared to deal with whatever happens at Kelly's Ford, which means that it's Jubal Early's division that has the responsibility for Rappahannock Station. Why does Rappahannock Station matter? because there used to be a bridge over the upper Rappahannock there, a 500-foot long railroad bridge. It has been destroyed 4 times already in the war and rebuilt 3 times already. The last time the Federals rebuilt it, Burnside burned it in November of '62 at the start of the Fredericksburg campaign, and then the Confederates, when the Federals come back at the end of their Gettysburg pursuit, they rebuild it in August of 1863. When the Confederates launched the Bristow campaign, Meade burns it during his retreat, and it's stayed burned since. The Confederates have not rebuilt it. Instead, they put a pontoon bridge about 250 yards upstream. And that pontoon bridge is their way to communicate with that fortified bridgehead north of the river. But Rappahannock Station matters because, once again, if the Federals are going to advance into Culpeper, they need the railroad. And the railroad is no good inside Culpeper unless you rebuild the bridge. And also, the high ground on the north bank at Rappahannock Station gave Lee the best place to dig the fortifications to create the bridgehead. And this is why all this stuff is going to happen at Rappahannock Station. What's the terrain like there? Well, there are a couple of pictures from the 1862 campaign that give us at least a little bit of an idea. So this is Rappahannock Station looking south toward the Rappahannock River, which is that tree line there. You'll see some high ground to the east. All these buildings are burned by the point that we're talking about. And the railroad track, remember, is torn up. This is in 1862 looking north from the south bank. So this is the high ground where the Confederate fortifications are going to be. But over on this side, the east side of the railroad, the ground is flat, very flat. Now, about 300 yards to the east of that is a high wooded ridge. But this over here doesn't offer much of an impediment to the enemy, and certainly no opportunity to dig any kind of really good entrenchments. So remember, French is now crossing at Kelly's Ford, and Sedgwick is bringing the 6th Corps and the 5th Corps down to confront Rappahannock Station. Sedgwick, who usually commands the 6th Corps, is commanding the wing. So just like French has got the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Corps under him in the left wing, Sedgwick has the right wing, and since he stepped up to Corps Command, Major General Horatio Wright is leading the 6th Corps. Wright usually runs the 1st Division. Wright is going to turn out to be a very good officer. He's going to command a corps of his own by the time the war is over. But at this point, he has virtually no combat experience. He's fought in one battle as a division commander, and that's the Battle of Secessionville. The 6th Corps, remember, was not really engaged at Gettysburg, certainly wasn't engaged on a divisional or a corps level. So since the Battle of Salem Church during the Chancellorsville campaign, the 6th Corps hasn't gotten to do very much. And so Wright is kind of green as a combat commander. The commander of the 5th Corps, on the other hand, George Sykes, has been in almost everything and is at least competent. He's not brilliant, but he's competent. When they approach Rappahannock Station, the only thing that's in their path on the north side of the river is the Brigade of Louisiana Tigers. The way that Ewell has set this up is that there's a brigade in the fortifications for a week at a time, and then you rotate out. The Stonewall Brigade had just left on November 6th. Louisiana Tigers have marched in. They have 5 regiments, the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th Louisiana. And this brigade is under the command of Brigadier General Harry Hayes, a very good officer, but he's away on court-martial duty. And so Colonel Davidson Penn, who usually runs the 7th Louisiana, is in charge of the brigade. And those Confederates are forward to deploy, so they're not in the entrenchments. So here's what you've got. The 7th and the 8th Louisiana are on a ridge line that's about a quarter of a mile away from the fortifications. The 6th Louisiana is on a wooded ridge east of the railroad track, about a half a mile away, and they're deployed for reconnaissance, basically. They're out there to watch for the enemy. The 5th Louisiana is manning fortifications on the south bank of the Rappahannock River. The only regiment that you have inside here is the So there's the 5th and a couple of its companies there. And then you have Louisiana Guard Artillery, 4 guns that are there. And you've got 2 Confederate batteries that are able to quickly reinforce. And Graham and Dance's batteries here. So the Federals show up and they appear about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And the alarm goes south of the Rappahannock. The 2 Federal Corps are showing up in front of Rappahannock Station. On one hand, for Lee, that's good. That's what he wants. He wants a whole bunch of Yankees to come at Rappahannock Station and sort of be stymied there. But for the Louisiana Tigers, this is very disconcerting. 26,000 troops. They have 900. They're on the wrong side of the river, and there's a single pontoon bridge that would allow them to get away. And the only thing that is working to their advantage is that the Federals have no idea how weak the Confederates are here. Meade has warned Sedgwick that there are fortifications, that they're strong, that this might be a place that you cannot storm and take by assault. So push, but be careful. And in order to be careful, Sedgwick decides that he's not going to do anything until he deploys the entirety of those 2 corps. Takes a couple of hours and gives the Confederates some badly needed time to recover from being caught by surprise. Penn, who's a good officer, pulls the bulk of his troops back into the fortifications, just leaves skirmishers out there. These 2 batteries come rushing up, so do Robert E. Lee and Jubal Early. And they're going to sit here and watch what's going to unfold. Early has ordered the rest of his division to rush to the river. Lee's put everybody else on alert. It's going to take 2 hours for the Federals to be ready to move. And when Sedgwick finally gives the order to move, he gives a very cautious order. So instead of sending his 2 corps in their entirety to sweep toward the river, if he had moved aggressively when his first troops showed up, Hayes and Penn would have had no chance but to abandon the bridgehead. But Sedgwick doesn't do that. Now, when he's ready to go, he's going to just send 2 divisions forward, one on either side of the railroad, one under Brigadier General Howe, one under Brigadier General Bartlett. They're going to move forward in a column of divisions, so tightly compacted mass. But their job isn't to attack the fortifications. It's to seal them off. So Bartlett, who's going to advance on the east side of the railroad, is supposed to go far enough to get his skirmishers in front of the Confederates, to get men at Norman's Ford to the east of the Confederate fortifications, and pin the Confederates down. Howe is supposed to do the same thing, but also take the ridge on which the Louisiana skirmishers are located, so the Federals can put artillery up there and try and shell the Confederates out of their fortifications. Sedgwick, Wright, Sykes, none of them want to launch an infantry assault on these fortifications. That looks like suicide, not interested in doing it. We're going to try and scare the Confederates away or shell them out of these fortifications. And so the Federals make their first advance, and here you can see it. The Confederate skirmishers fall back. The Federal skirmishers advance. They seal off the Confederate fortifications. Penn brings the 5th Louisiana over here to reinforce the bridgehead, but it's too big for his 900 troops. So he's got the 6th Louisiana and a small outwork here on the east side. Then he's got the 9th Louisiana and the 8th Louisiana here, and then he's got the 5th and the 7th there, and in his center, just a line of skirmishers. He doesn't have enough men, which means that if these 2 divisions had kept coming, once again the Confederates would have had to abandon the bridgehead. But they don't keep coming, and to their amazement, about 200 yards in front of their works, the Yankees stop. And they go to ground and they engage in a protracted firefight with the Confederates. The Federal artillery comes up onto this ridge and begins to shell the Confederate positions. The Confederate guns return fire. And for about an hour and 45 minutes, it's an artillery duel that doesn't accomplish anything at all, except waste ammunition. A lot of noise, and it's getting closer and closer to dark. It comes pretty early in November. In this part of Virginia. So Lee is here watching this, and it actually looks like everything is working out according to his plan. The Federals are crossing at Kelly's Ford. They're walking into his trap. He's got half the Union Army that is stuck here in front of Rappahannock Station. It's apparently not going to attack. And if it stays there all night, during the evening, Lee's going to concentrate almost his entire army toward Kellysville. At dawn, he's going to launch a massive attack against whatever French has gotten across the Rappahannock River. He's going to overwhelm it, destroy it, drive it into the river. Another great victory, and the Federal offensive will be defeated. Why are the Federals so afraid of Rappahannock Station's fortifications? What do they look like? Well, there are deficiencies in them. There is no abattis in front of them, no obstructions. There are no ditches the way that you see in the big fortifications around Richmond or Petersburg or something like that. There is a pretty gentle slope, about 200 yards long, that doesn't really offer an impediment to the Federals if they want to scale those heights to attack the fortifications. There aren't enough troops in them. It's a very shallow bridgehead. It's only got one pontoon bridge to either retreat or reinforce over. These are the defects that the Confederates are aware of. But if you're on the Federal side of things, looking at the river, it all looks very different. This is a drawing made by Edward Forbes in August of 1862, because there was a fight at Rappahannock Station from the other direction during the campaign of Second Manassas. And so this is the ridge where the Confederate fortifications are on. These are the two hills where the batteries, Confederate batteries on the south bank of the river are. That is what used to be Rappahannock Station, now burned. That's the railroad line. There's the river. This is the Freeman's Ford Road right here. It's sunken, so it's a pretty good position for the Federals to be in during all this skirmishing. But if you're on the ridge that House has taken, from which Union artillery is pounding this position, you've got to cross a quarter of a mile of basically open ground in the face of Confederate fire, then go up that slope to assail these earthworks, which from the Yankee vantage point look terribly strong. And most of the men in the Union Army remember Fredericksburg, and they remember attacking entrenchments. That didn't work out very well for them. So Sedgwick, obviously, not eager to do it. Sykes, not eager to do it. The reality. One of the things that I discovered in researching this book is that there is no map in the official records and the atlas to accompany them that talk about the Battle of Rappahannock Station at all. Very strange. There's not a Confederate map. There's not a Federal map. It's just the pace of the war, I guess, was such that this seems like a minor event. But there were two maps that I discovered that were drawn by Federals who participated in the battle almost immediately after the fight. And they give us some idea of what's going on here. So they're slightly different. Neither one of them really give you much of a scale. But this one, there's a little creek called Tin Pot Run. There's the ridges that the Federals are on. And the Confederate line is in a bend in the river. And so you see that east of the Orange and Alexandria, there's a little outwork about 160 feet long that's defended by the 6th Louisiana. And then the main Confederate work, there's a steep hill immediately adjacent to the railroad, and they have a small fort there fully enclosed with 2 of their 4 guns. Then about 300 yards of trench to a larger fort that has 2 guns in it. And then the Confederate line sort of swings back toward the river there. Now, the nature of that line is not, as is depicted here, a semicircle. In fact, this is a pretty well prepared position. It is zigzag, so that there are salients in it that would allow you to put a crossfire on the enemy. There's your small fort, there's your big fort. But here's something that nobody ever talked about. There's your pontoon bridge. And that pontoon bridge is connected to a road that goes north. So the whole point, remember, this bridgehead is that Lee could launch an offensive out of it, right? Which means you have to be able to get troops beyond the earthworks. And they have to have a road to do that. And their artillery would need a road to do that. And their supply wagons would need a road to do that. And so the road crosses through the fortifications. And for that road to be useful, you cannot dig fortifications across the road, right? So and I know it's hard to see here in this map, but at this point where the road crosses the fortifications right next to the large fort, there are two gaps. The road kind of diverges. There are two gaps. And the way that the Confederates have defended those is that they've broken up their line to let the road pass through, and then 50 yards or so in front of where the road passes through, they built earthworks. So if you've ever had to drive onto a secure installation and they've got all those barricades and you have to sort of zigzag through, it's exactly what's going on here, right? The difficulty is that the guys manning these two outworks are kind of out on a limb, aren't they? And the idea is that, they're covering the gap. So this is not a solid part of the line. It's the most vulnerable part of the line. The Confederate defenses between the two forts are a stepped trench, which is kind of unusual at this point in the war. If you're familiar with World War I, that's going to look like something you've seen before. But you do this so that the enemy gets in, they can't shoot down the length of it. But this also means that you don't have a solid line here. The troops are sort of broken up into packets of men to hold the various angles in the trench. It makes it a little bit harder to control for the officers. Down in the trench they can't see. Standing up behind the trench, they're vulnerable. So from the Federal perspective, this looks like a very dangerous place. It has some weaknesses. Are those weaknesses fatal? Not necessarily fatal. Lee figures that if the Yankees attack him, they can present only as long a front as he can, 1-to-1 odds, and if he can shoot apart the initial wave, follow-up waves will not continue the attack. So Lee is gambling here. He doesn't want this place to be so big and so robust that he has to spend a lot of troops to defend it, but he wants it to be scary enough that the Federals hopefully won't even bother to attack it. And he's gambling that if they do attack it, it's stout enough that it can fend them off, at least as long as he needs to fend them off before he can attack and destroy French. So Early's brigade is coming, or Early's division is coming up to reinforce. And the first brigade that arrives is Hoke's North Carolina Brigade. Hoke is not with them. He and one of his regiments, the 21st North Carolina, have gone home to round up deserters. And that means that Colonel Archibald Godwin, a Virginian, who's 6'7" tall. We have a A&V basketball player here running this brigade. He's got 3 regiments, the 54th, the 6th, the 57th. Notice how big the 54th North Carolina is. It wasn't at Gettysburg. It wasn't at Gettysburg. It was dealing with the prisoners taken at the Third Battle of Winchester. So good for them, but not good in a way, because these other regiments, the 6th and the 57th, and all of the Louisiana Tigers had attacked Cemetery Hill at dusk on July 2nd and gotten in among the Yankee guns. And if they had been reinforced, they would have won the Battle of Gettysburg for the Confederates. These guys know the danger of a night attack. That's important. But here's the other thing all of those Louisiana troops know, and they now tell their North Carolina comrades who come fill in the trenches. Lee's a little surprised by that. He hadn't ordered Early to send troops into the bridgehead, and he sees them going across. He's like, wait a second. We want to, keep our exposure north of the river as low as we possibly can. And Early says, we don't even have a solid front over there, and if we don't reinforce Hayes, who's shown back up from court-martial duty, takes command of his brigade again, then the position's vulnerable. So Lee says, well, go ahead. And so these guys still in that middle part of the fortification that was weak, held only by skirmishers. But as they do that, what do the Louisiana troops tell them? There's 2 Yankee corps in front of us. 2 full Federal corps. And now, counting all the infantry and all the artillery, there are 2,000 of us on this side of the river with a single bridge behind us. There's no way we're going to get reinforcements. There's not even room to shove any more men into this shallow bridgehead. And if those Yankees decide to come after us, they'll just come, and they'll come wave after wave after wave of them. The Mongol hordes are going to swarm across that quarter mile, and there's no way we're going to stop them. We've been put out here in an incredibly vulnerable situation. It's exceptionally dangerous to us. And this is actually the one benefit that the Federals derived out of Sedgwick taking 2 hours to deploy 2 corps. The psychological effect of that on the Confederate defenders who recognized the enormous odds against them. And the way that this thing is going to go down, that's going to play a critical role in what's going to happen. But the Confederates now at least have a solid front in front of, or in their fortifications. And so this is what it looks like. 7th and 5th Louisiana on the left flank, 54th, 6th, and 57th North Carolina in the center, 6th Louisiana detached over here and completely isolated, by the way, because the railroad here is on about a 10-foot tall embankment as it heads toward the river. So there's no connectivity here whatsoever. 2 guns, Louisiana Guard, artillery in this fortification, 2 in the large redoubt here. The 9th Louisiana manning 300 yards of trench between them, and then the 8th Louisiana has responsibility for this point where the road breaks up the entrenchments and the large redoubt right there. The Federal skirmishers have sealed the Confederates off and have been skirmishing with them for about 2 hours, a very nasty skirmish. Lots of guys get hit. Union artillery is firing into the Confederate positions, but it hasn't had much of an effect. And so it's getting very close to dark as Sedgwick sends a message to Meade, who has positioned himself in between his 2 wings. Meade knows what's happened at Kelly's Ford, but Sedgwick has been very negligent about keeping him informed of what's happening at Rappahannock Station. And so part of that is it's a 2-hour round trip by a mounted courier to get from Sedgwick to Meade. So there's a real communication lag here. But Sedgwick sends back word, I've masked the Confederate fortifications and we're trying to shell them out, but I don't think I'm going to be able to drive them away before night. And for me, that's bad news, right? It means his army's divided. Lee's going to get to do what he wants. And so Meade sends word back, well, if you're not going to take Rappahannock Station before nightfall, you're going to have to send the whole 5th Corps and part of the 6th Corps over to Kelly's Ford so we can reinforce French in time to meet the attack that Lee is inevitably going to launch, which of course, if you take that many troops away, you open up the possibility of that attack coming out of Rappahannock Station instead of aiming at Kelly's Ford. Now, Lee was going to go to Kelly's Ford, but Meade doesn't know that. So this is the position. And at 5 o'clock, the Federals bring in more artillery to increase the power of their bombardment. Not going to really make much of a difference, and you have something of a stalemate. And in about 30 minutes, the sun's going to set, and about 45, it's going to be completely dark. So it looks like this is the way things are going to remain. And in fact, Lee is so confident of that, although he sees a lot of musket flashes here, he and Early can't hear anything because there's a very stiff south wind carrying all the noise away from the Confederate side of the river. And as the twilight deepens, you can't see very well. Lee concludes that this is just skirmishing. Everything is working according to plan, and he rides back toward his headquarters to make plans for his counterattack against French. Unfortunately for Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia, this stalemate is not going to last very long because of this guy here, Brigadier General David Russell, who usually commands a brigade in the 1st Division of the 6th Corps, but because Sedgwick is a wing commander and so Wright has stepped up to run the Corps, Russell has stepped up into Wright's place and is running the division. Interesting thing about Russell and Howe, who had taken this high ridge over here early in the afternoon, they're not afraid of entrenchments. Why are they not afraid of entrenchments? Because in May of 1863, they're the guys who stormed Marie's Heights at Fredericksburg during the Chancellorsville campaign and took them. In their mind, we can take anything. Russell is a very aggressive commander. He believes in doing reconnaissance as far forward as he can get, so he's been out here with his skirmish line, and he has concluded that the Confederate works are weakly held and vulnerable, and he believes his men can take them. So he sends word back to Wright and asks for permission to attack the Confederate fortifications. And this is his plan. He's got the 6th Maine out here skirmishing with the Confederates. 5 of its 10 companies are already out here. He's going to use a single brigade what was his own brigade before he stepped up to division command, the 3rd Brigade. He's going to, right as it starts to get dark, which is not necessarily planning, it's circumstance, right? It's about to get dark, but this is going to work to our advantage. He's going to send the other 5 companies of the 5th Maine over that ridge in skirmish formation, and the Confederates are going to see that. And they're not going to think anything of it. Because it's almost night, you're relieving one skirmish line with another, sort of standard operating procedure on a battlefield. Confederates aren't going to worry about this too much. In reality, the 6th Maine is going to concentrate in that sunken road. They're going to fix bayonets. They're going to uncap their muskets so there's no temptation to stop and open fire. And they're going to launch an immediate bayonet charge across that 200 yards of open ground obstructed only by one little natural ditch. And the idea is that they're going to keep the Confederates in this large redoubt busy while the 5th Wisconsin, moving forward in a column of divisions, and behind that the 118th Pennsylvania and the 49th Pennsylvania are coming behind in a 3rd wave, all concentrated so it's like a mailed fist that's going to hit at a very narrow point in the Confederate line. And these guys are going to be about 5 minutes apart, so the reinforcements will get there very quickly. We'll take the large redoubt, and then we'll take the bridge, and all these rebels are cut off. There's about 1,200 Union troops. We're about to attack 2,000 rebels. But not really, because they're aiming a very narrow point, so they're about to attack about 250 Confederates. If you had tried to do this in broad daylight, the rebels could have seen what was coming, they could have judged its strength, and they would have shot you to pieces. But in a murky twilight, the Confederates aren't going to be able to see very well. The growing darkness is going to be a cloak. And remember, the Confederates know that there are 2 full corps out here. And psychologically, therefore, they're apt to perceive this attack as the first of many waves. And the Yankees throw all their strength against us. They keep coming and they keep coming and they keep coming. We can't stop them. Nonetheless, if this attack had gone in exactly the way it was planned, it probably doesn't work. Because Hayes and Godwin could have pulled troops from elsewhere to counterattack and drive the Federals out. Fortunately for Hayes, and that's the 2 assault leading columns, the 6th Maine, 321 men under Colonel Harris, 300 men under Allen, and the 5th Wisconsin. They're the guys who are going to carry the fight. Fortunately for Russell, his plan doesn't work exactly as he lays it out, because he gets help, unexpected help. A 50-man company from the 121st New York under Captain John Fish is next to the 6th Maine on the skirmish line. And Fish, who is a very ambitious fellow, had gotten orders from his brigade commander when he advanced to skirmishers, only one set of orders: stay up with the furthest advance. Those 121st guys aren't supposed to be part of this fight at all. But when the 6th Maine comes up to reinforce its skirmishers, Fish goes over and says, "Hey, are you guys relieving the skirmish line?" And they say, "No, this is what we're doing." And Fish says, "Well, I guess nobody sent me the order, but I'm supposed to stay up with the furthest advance, and so I need to attack too." Not only is Fish going to attack, he's going to strike the weakest part of the Confederate line by pure happenstance. That's what he's in front of, right? The Federals in the 5th Corps are going to attack too, even though they're not supposed to have anything to do with this. Major William Morrell of the 20th Maine is in charge of his regiment skirmishers. They were supposed to all be on the east side of the railroad, but because the railroad makes this slight curve here, as they advance, 50 of his 75 skirmishers wind up west of it, and they're on the skirmish line right next to the 6th Maine. And while the skirmishing is going on, Morrell wanders over to the 6th Maine to visit with friends from back home. And so he's there when Harris concentrates his regiment, and he's listening to Harris explain to his company commanders, here's what we're going to do. We're going to fix bayonets, we're going to uncap our muskets, and we're going to charge. And they look over at Morrell and say, "You want to come?" And Morrell says, we can't let boys from Maine go it alone. So he runs back to his men and he says, hey, the 6th Maine's on our right and they're going to attack. Let's go in with them. And so these 50 guys from the 20th Maine on this side of the railroad are going to go into the attack. And when they begin to move, because you've got connecting files up here on the railroad embankment so you can sort of see left and right, that these guys shout down to the other 25 guys in the 20th Maine, hey, our fellows on this side of the line are attacking. I guess that means we're supposed to attack. And when those 25 guys from the 20th Maine on this side of the railroad go forward, then all these other skirmishers say, I guess somebody gave orders that we didn't get. We should attack too. So this is 300 extra guys here and an extra 50. And they're striking very vulnerable parts of the Confederate line. And it turns out that this is going to be incredibly important because the 5th Wisconsin's late. It's 5 minutes late. It's going to take 10 minutes to get into the fight instead of 5. Why? Because word had gone back that they were supposed to go in with uncapped muskets. Their commander doesn't order them to load. He begins to advance, and his men are not happy. They don't want to go into a battle with unloaded muskets. And so they're grumbling and complaining, and then they decide, we're going to load anyway. Even though one of Russell's aides is there saying, no, rely on the bayonet. The veteran infantry look at him like some greenhorn idiot. No, we're not going in with unloaded muskets. And Colonel Allen finally realizes what's going on. He calls his regiment and he orders it to load. And of course that stalls the 118th, or rather the 119th and the 49th Pennsylvania behind them. Everybody stops to load, which means that the 6th Maine, of course, keeps going. The gap between the two waves widens. It's going to take twice as long for reinforcements to get to the 6th Maine that had been planned, which means that these extra attacks are critical because they are going to pin the Confederates down close to the main point of Russell's attack. And there's Morrell, and here's the beginning of the fight. So once again, we're very fortunate. Edwin Forbes is here, and he draws it. So what are we looking at? There is the river. Those are the stone pylons of the burnt railroad bridge. There's the hills on the south bank where the Confederate artillery is and where Lee and Early have been watching the battle. There's the railroad embankment. See how tall it is? There's that high hill on which the small fort is located. And right here is the 160 yards of trench held by the 6th Louisiana, which only has 180 guys. And earlier that day, it had watched an entire division sweeping across that flat ground toward it and was amazed that it had stopped instead of kept coming. But now in the darkness, they hear a whole bunch of yelling and firing over on the other side of the railroad embankment. They see all these skirmishers start to come at them who outnumber them 2-1. And they can't see much behind those skirmishers, but it's pretty easy to imagine, isn't it? That division that had been advancing before is now advancing now. And we 180 guys from Louisiana are not going to stop a federal division, let alone a federal corps. And so Colonel Monaghan, who's in command here, says this is an impossible situation and we're getting out of it. So he orders his men to move by their left flank and get to the railroad embankment and then retreat across the river at the stone pylons where the river is just barely fordable. And about half of those guys manage to get across before the federal skirmishers get to the riverbank, and then they begin to shoot at the guys who are still trying to wade the river in armpit, very cold water. Many of them who had thrown away their muskets so that they had a chance to get across the river, and they're shooting them in the back. And the Federals sort of then realize, oh my God, we're just murdering guys, and they stop firing, probably because they're reloading, and they yell at the Confederates to stop and surrender. And about 100 of the rebels turn around and begin to slosh back toward the Federals. But then one of their officers, who's been hiding behind a stone pylon, steps out from the pylon, brandishes a pistol and sword, and orders them, no, turn around and go back to the Confederate side of the river. And so they turn around and they start to go back in the direction their officers told them. The Yankees start to shoot again. And they're dropping more guys into the river, and about 75 of them take cover around the stone pylons, and eventually they surrender. The only redeeming thing here is about half of the regiment gets away. Its colors his color bearer, has ripped his flag from the staff, thrown the staff away, and he's one of the men who gets captured, but he's hidden the flag around his waist under his uniform, and the Yankees don't search the prisoners. So he takes that with him to prison for 5 months and manages to keep it hidden from the Federals for that entire 5 months. And when he's exchanged in the spring in a great big prisoner exchange, he returns the flag to service. So a little bit of a moral victory here to what otherwise is a disaster for the Confederates. But their left flank, east of the railroad, collapses almost instantaneously, and for very understandable reasons. What happens on the other side? Well, here's the second half of Forbes' drawing. So this is the business going on in the east. There's the fort, the 300 yards of trench. There's the large redoubt. And what happens is, coming out of the sunken road, the 6th Maine gets up here, and the skirmishers from the 20th Maine are attacking here. They're going to grab this small fort with the 2 cannon pretty easily. The 6th Maine tries to assault the Confederate works, and it's basically shot to pieces. And it's driven to ground. And a lot of the guys are hollering out that they surrender, don't shoot, but some of them get in. Just a handful here and there. The Confederates counterattack, drive them out. You've got some of the Yankees yelling that we surrender. Others are saying, no, get up, attack, keep going. And they win the argument. And the 6th Maine launches a second attack. It gets some more guys into the earthworks this time, but they aren't able to stay there. There is a very vicious hand-to-hand combat that takes place inside that large redoubt. One Federal soldier said it was the Louisiana Tigers attacked them like a pack of hungry wolves jumping at their throats. And the Federals are driven out of the large redoubt for a second time. They're clinging to its parapet, firing at the Confederates. The only good thing that's happened here is Fish's men, where they hit that weak part in the line where the road breaks it up, their attack succeeds brilliantly because, once again, the Confederates cannot offer a solid resistance. The parapets are very low, and so when the Federals jump up on them, they're towering over the Confederates, looking down on them. They're in very narrow trenches, and they can only aim straight up. The only way you could shoot would be really to shoot left or right, but in the darkness, everybody tries to aim straight up. They can't hit anything. Fish shoots one of the Confederates in the head and yells out, surrender. And once again, because now it's almost completely dark, these guys from the 8th Louisiana don't know how many Federals are coming at them. They've just seen this mass of men moving forward. They psychologically are prepared for the Federals to throw masses of men at them. And to the surprise of Fish and his men, 160 Confederates throw down their weapons and surrender. And he details a few guys to take them to the rear, and he's pierced the Confederate line at his most vulnerable point. Now, he doesn't keep it for long because the North Carolina troops, the 57th North Carolina, to his immediate right, refuse their flank, and they begin to fire at him. They force him back against the large redoubt. But you can see here, within 5 minutes of this attack starting, the Confederate right flank is gone. This fort is gone. The Federals have gotten the weakest part in. But here at the large redoubt, the issue is still in debate. And then the 5th Wisconsin shows up. 5 minutes late, but it shows up. And one wing swings out to hit this trench between the two forts. The other wing sweeps in to assist the attack on the redoubt. And with that extra strength, the Federals get into it. And in another bout of vicious hand-to-hand combat, they manage to take it. The 9th Louisiana, which is between these two forts, knows that its right flank is gone, its left flank is in danger, and that the only retreat option is beyond this fort. So they begin to move in this direction, drifting down toward the Pontoon Bridge. Hayes is trying to gather what's left of the 8th and 9th Louisiana around the Pontoon Bridge, maybe to launch a counterattack, perhaps to organize an orderly retreat. 3 of the Federals from the 6th Maine get so caught up in what's going on, they run down toward this mob of Confederates in almost now complete darkness. 3 guys, 3 privates. And they come up against this disorganized mass from the 8th and 9th Louisiana, and they fire their muskets in the air, and they demand a surrender. And another 140 Louisianans throw up their arms and give up because they don't know it's just 3 guys. they've seen all these masses come at them and the line fall apart very quickly. They're not going to sit there and let themselves be slaughtered. These are veteran troops. And one thing that veteran troops will not do is throw their lives away needlessly. They can calculate odds. And in their calculation, the odds are grossly against them. And so they're not going to die for no reason. The Confederates counterattack to try and retake this, but now the 119th and the 49th Pennsylvania show up and they reinforce the Federal line, and the large redoubt is lost now. The North Carolinians refuse their flank, but this puts them in a very bad position. So here is the 119th and the 49th. They come up to reinforce where Fish had broken the line. This has all been lost now. This flank's being refused. And for the Federals, they're halfway to a victory. But they're not there yet. The troops that Russell's throwing into this now are pretty much exhausted. The 6th Maine has been shot to pieces. The 5th Wisconsin has taken serious damage. And there are more Confederates here to the west than there are Federals around here. And some of these Confederates from salients in the line are putting a crossfire into the Federals around the large redoubt. And so Russell has sent back for reinforcements. He's finally decided, I need more men. And he sends a series of couriers back to Colonel Emory Upton, who's temporarily commanding a brigade. And he tells Upton, bring forward 2 regiments. Interesting thing about this fight is that even though Russell's commanding a division, he attacks with a single brigade. And when that single brigade, even with help, gets stymied after breaking the Confederate line, he doesn't order up another brigade or a 3rd brigade. He asks for 2 regiments. So the Federal, he's really doing this on the cheap. All right? So these messengers get back to Upton. Upton, who oddly enough is going to become the hero of this fight, even though he's not the mastermind here. He's not the guy who planned this. He's going to take what he sees here. And at Spotsylvania Courthouse, he's going to say, hey, remember what we did at Rappahannock Station? We can do that here. And he's going to get famous for it. And because he gets famous, and Russell gets killed later in the war, whenever anybody talks about Spotsylvania, they're like, well, where did you get the idea? Well, the idea came from Rappahannock Station. Upton was at Rappahannock Station. Oh, he's the genius. No, he's not. But he plays an important part. He's very aggressively minded. He's anxious to be part of the battle. So he leads the 121st New York, 250 men, the 5th Maine, 314 men, forward in a column of divisions, and his initial orders are to reinforce the battle for the large redoubt. But by the time he gets close, the large redoubt's been taken. And at that point, Russell, who suffered a very painful wound in his foot, still on horseback, however, rides out to Upton, intercepts him and says, forget about reinforcing this battle. I need you to attack this salient and stop this crossfire. And so Upton leads his 2 regiments into this ditch, forms them in line of battle, gives them a quick speech about state and unit pride, orders them to drop their packs and to attack with the bayonet only. It's now almost completely dark. The Confederates are seeing indistinct masses of Yankees out in front of them. And because they're advancing in these column of divisions instead of lines of battle, it looks like a big mass of men, even though numerically it's really not. When the Federals charge out of the ditch, the Confederates here, the 54th North Carolina, remember these are the guys who weren't at Gettysburg. They weren't in the night attack, so they're especially vulnerable to imagining the terrors of what's out there in the dark. They've spread out to try and take some of the line that has been abandoned by refusing the flank, so they're not densely massed here. And when Upton comes at them, they fire too high. Dark, they can't see. The tall Yankees get hit. About a dozen of them go down with head wounds. Guys are 6 foot, a little taller. Bad to be tall on a battlefield. They get hit, but the rest of them get up to the works, and after the briefest flurry of hand-to-hand combat, the Confederate line there collapses. These guys run away or they surrender, they get the 54th flag. And now Upton's got this part of the trench right there. And he has to decide what to do. And the one thing he knows he can't do is make an advance straight forward, because then he puts himself in a cul-de-sac and the Confederates can shoot him down. And so he can't immediately move along the trench line, because then he's going to have a front of 1 man wide, and that guy's going to hit a Confederate at some point. He's going to shoot him. And so Upton sends word to Russell that the Confederates off to my right are disorganized, discombobulated. We can tell that. I'm going to continue the attack. But the way that I'm going to continue it is not at all what anybody who wrote tactical textbooks would recommend. This is a drawing Alfred Woad made of Upton's attack. In terms of the combat, it's pretty over-the-top imaginary, but it does give you some information. Notice the zigzag in the Confederate line, which conforms with the maps. There's the Pontoon Bridge, that one way over the river, and the river here is very wide and deep, so it's not fordable at all. There's your small fort up there. There's the large redoubt. The Federals now have this salient in the Confederate line. Upton exploits his success. He exploits the confusion. He exploits the darkness. He sends 1 battalion of the 121st New York to seize the bridge. He leaves 1 battalion of the 5th Maine to hold what he's taken. Then he pulls the other 2 battalions, the other 2 halves of these regiments, out of the works, reforms them on the downward slope in front of the Confederate fortifications where they can't be seen, where they're safe from fire. Then he orders them to right face so that they double their ranks, form a column, and then he races them at the double quick in front of the Confederate fortifications, again in the dark, downslope where the Confederates can't really hurt him. And when the rear of his column is basically in line with where he finds Confederates, he orders his men to move by the left flank, so they turn left, undouble their files, form a battle line very quickly. Then he once again yells out, "We're going to attack, you're going to rely on the bayonet," but he knows, because the Confederates can hear him, a little psychological warfare. He lies to his men who know he's lying, but he says, when the Confederates fire, everyone will lay down because there are 4 other lines of battle advancing behind us. And what, of course, are the Confederates imagining? That's exactly what the line after line after line of Federals are going to coming, and now Upton has played psychologically into that. And he orders the attack, and there's no resistance. Just a minute of combat, and the rest of the 54th North Carolina has either fled or it surrenders. You know, it's more when the Federals get on top of the parapets, because they're so low and the trenches are so narrow, they have a very tactical advantage. They're pointing loaded and bayoneted muskets down at these Confederates who are crowded into this trench. They can barely move, and they can't shoot any way but straight up. So, this part of the Confederate line is gone now. The 6th and 57th have backed up. They're on this awkward slope leading down toward an unfordable river. But the 7th and the 5th Louisiana are still over here in their trenches. They've been skirmishing with the 5th Vermont to their front. And although they've heard some wind-muffled shooting and shouting behind them, in the darkness they have no idea what's happening here. They do know that it's vital for them to hold their front to protect the rear of all these guys. And Hayes hasn't called upon them to send reinforcements, so they think the battle's actually going fairly well. Upton doesn't have any more troops left to throw into this battle. But that turns out to be okay, because Colonel Clark Edwards, who's commander of the 5th Maine, who had helped in this attack, sees some Confederates running off to his right, running off to the west. And he said, "Oh, some of these rebels are trying to get away. I'm going to catch them." So he gets 12 men from his command, and he leads them after these rebels. And they go running off to the west, and in a very short distance, to their surprise, they're standing behind a whole Confederate regiment, almost in with its file closers. And Edwards realizes, oh, I've just made a very bad mistake, because if the rebels realize there are 12 of us, we're dead. So he bluffs. He calls out, "Who's in command of this part of the line?" and Captain John Angell, who's in charge of the 5th Louisiana, which only has 125 guys, hears it and he turns around and he says, well, I am. Who wants to know? And Edwards says, I'm Colonel Clark Edwards in command of the 5th Maine, and you will surrender, sir. And Angell is completely taken aback. He doesn't know the Federals are behind him. This is completely news to him. And so he says, let me consult my officers. And Edwards says, I'm not going to give you 1 minute. Surrender now, or we're going to shoot you down. I've got you. And he waves his hand back behind him and says, you see that mass of men back there? And Angell can see this kind of, hovering mass of indistinct human beings mulling around. This is actually Upton gathering the prisoners of the 54th North Carolina and shoving them out of the works. But Angell doesn't know that. And Edwards says, those are all my men. He says, your whole other part of the earthworks are gone, and those troops have surrendered, and we've got the bridge, and your position is hopeless. And if you don't surrender right now, we're going to attack. And of course, all of these are facing the wrong way. They would be struck literally in the back. And Angell still hesitates, and so Edwards yells around and says, 5th Maine, 121st New York, charge! They can't hear him. And they're in no position to charge anyway, but for Angell, that's it. He's not going to have his men slaughter, so he agrees to surrender without firing a shot. And when the 5th Louisiana goes up, the 7th Louisiana has to surrender too, without firing a shot. Some of the Confederates manage to get to the river, try and swim to the other side. If you're a mounted officer, you're going to get away. Mounted courier's going to get away either by swimming the river or by dashing across the Pontoon Bridge, even though the Federals are firing on it. But the infantry on foot, some of them drown trying to swim the river. A few get away, but most of them are captured. Edwards himself winds up holding 12 Confederate swords that are surrendered to him by rebel officers. So now the entire bridgehead is gone. It's completely dark. Everything is a massive confusion. And the only 2 Confederates left are the 6th North Carolina and the 57th. And it's about 600 men with some of the stragglers who've attached themselves to this last organized body of resistance. And Colonel Galdwin here has to decide what to do. And Colonel Tate, who's in command of the 6th North Carolina, comes over to him and says, we've already lost the position. This thing is a disaster. The only smart thing to do is to fight our way to the bridge and get over it to safety. And the odds are long, the casualties will be heavy, but if we stay here, the casualties will be 100%, either killed, wounded, or captured. Godwin, showing more gallantry than sense, says, I have no orders to retreat. And we'll try and retake the position. Well, there's no way you're going to retake the position. And gradually the Federals come down this slope, and in the darkness, Godwin's men in bits and pieces and then in large numbers recognize the game is up. They throw down their weapons and they surrender. Godwin's actually has to be tackled by the Federals and have his weapons ripped out of his hands before he's going to give up. But basically, the battle is lost. For a while, stragglers and survivors come across the bridge. The Confederates only very belatedly realize what has happened. And then they rush reinforcements up here, but if the Federals put their artillery on this high ground in the morning, they're going to blast apart any Confederates on the lower south bank of the river. So you've got to burn that bridge. The Confederates, with difficulty, manage to do that, at least burn part of it, so that the Yankees cannot strike at them at dawn the next morning. Lee now knows that his scheme of defense has been completely collapsed. There's not going to be a counterattack at Kelly's Ford. He has to instead retreat. And that's going to be hard because his army was prepared to spend the winter in Culpeper County. And so he's brought in a whole bunch of supplies, and you got to save all of that stuff. And there aren't enough wagons to save everything. But his quartermasters do a great job. In a handful of hours, they gather almost everything together and they begin a retreat. But it's going to take them all night and part of the next day to get over the Rapidan. And you've got to buy them the time to make that retreat. So Lee doesn't withdraw his infantry until midnight, and then instead of going all the way back to the Rapidan, he has to form a line just north of Culpeper Courthouse to basically stall the Federals if they attack so his wagons have a chance to get away. This is an incredibly vulnerable position. Its flanks are open. The Federals advance here. They get between him and the Rapidan. If they come around here, there's nothing to stop them. His men get here just before dawn, and then they do something that has never happened in the war up to this point. They start to dig in. Not engineers. The common infantryman stops where he's at, turns around, and starts to dig in without orders. This is the precursor of what's going to happen at Mine Run and then the rest of the war. The Confederates are going to entrench in a very short time so that if the Federals did attack the next morning, November 8th, if it was a frontal attack, they would run into Confederate field fortifications. The question is that attack going to happen? And the answer is no, it's not. Because George Meade doesn't find out that Rappahannock Station has been taken until almost 10 o'clock at night. He doesn't have a lot of information. He's still worried that the Confederates will attack French, so he still sends the 5th Corps and 2 brigades of the 6th to reinforce Kelly's Ford. And his intention all along was to unite his army at Brandy Station, and then hopefully Lee would fight a big battle there. Why he thinks Lee will make a stand at Brandy Station is hard to understand. He never explains it. But he spends the next morning very cautiously and slowly advancing, concentrating his army at Brandy Station, and then he forms the entire 3rd Corps and the entire 6th Corps into a massive line of battle and advances it 5 miles toward Culpeper in line, which is a very beautiful thing to see, but very slow and time consuming. And then about 3 p.m, he halts and puts his men into camp for the evening. If they go 2 more miles, they find the Confederates. 2 more miles, and even though it'll be close to dark, they could start a battle that might entangle Lee so badly that he can't retreat to the Rapidan the next day. And Meade has a chance to destroy the Confederate Army, which is holding one of the most vulnerable positions it has ever held, both of its flanks in the air and a difficult river only about 10 miles behind it. But Meade says, we've done enough. This is a victory. I hadn't really expected a victory. We're not going to go looking for trouble. And as a consequence, the Federals, with almost 2.5 hours of useful daylight, give up the chase. And that allows Lee that night to retreat across the Rapidan and to reach safety. And so by the time you get to November 13th, the 2 armies are basically where they were in early October of 1863. The Federals halfway into Culpeper, the Confederates behind the Rapidan, and the war has once more slipped into something of a stalemate, a balance in Virginia. Not for long, because Meade's going to launch the Mine Run offensive in 2 weeks, and different story, different book, but it means that the Federals had won a remarkable victory that destroyed 2 entire Confederate brigades and captured a battery of artillery. And the casualties here are very lopsided. The Confederates, 21 dead, 181 wounded, almost 2,000 prisoners. And the vast majority of that from Rappahannock Station. The Federals, 96 dead, 409 wounded, only 11 missing. And most of their casualties in the 6th Maine and the 5th Wisconsin had taken the brunt of all of this. Interesting thing, though, about half of these Confederate prisoners are going to be back in time for the Overland Campaign because of prisoner exchanges. So almost all the Louisiana Tigers are going to be exchanged, and some of Hoke's men are going to be exchanged. So the loss to Lee's manpower here is temporary, but you can imagine how disconcerted everybody in the South was about one of their best brigades being wiped off the map. And in fact, it would have been wiped out completely, as would Hoke's brigade, if they hadn't had so many men gathering supplies to build winter quarters. So there were several hundred of them that weren't there, and the bridge had to be gobbled up. So the semblance of those brigades is going to hang around. But one of the greatest disasters for the Confederate cause, we don't want to go there. So Meade has launched an offensive. across the Rappahannock. It has succeeded brilliantly, and who's surprised by that? Meade, his army, who now think a great deal of him, and Abraham Lincoln, who really didn't expect this. He sends a telegram to Meade, "I've seen the dispatches from your operations on the Rappahannock, and I wish to say, well done. Well done. I didn't know you had it in you." And guess what? Now that I know that you have it in you, I want you to do it again. We're not done here. You're going to continue to advance, and especially since we don't want Lee to be sending any more troops to Tennessee and Chattanooga, you need to keep the rebels busy, and thus you're going to get the Mine Run campaign. So Rappahannock Station, a much more complex and dramatic story than has usually been represented, but certainly one of the most stunning, if small-scale, victories that the AOP ever won over Robert E. Lee. But a narrow victory, it could have so easily gone the other way. And if not for David Russell, that battle wouldn't have even been fought. So he's the real hero, although Wright and Sedgwick and Meade actually get all the credit for it, as is the way things usually work in military stories. And so I appreciate you letting me talk about it. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to try and give you an answer.
You mentioned very early in your presentation 10,000 troops being diverted to put down the uprising in New York. Was that decisive in any way?
Decisive in putting down, not just in New York, but they went other places. And in the sense that there were no more draft riots, yes, it cowed the troublemakers. Those troops didn't stay gone long. When the 11th and 12th Corps are sent to Chattanooga, those guys come back to the Army of the Potomac. And so interestingly, Meade's strength stays the same. Losing those two corps is counterbalanced by getting all those draft enforcers back. But yes, it seemed to make sense for the Federals to do that. And, you know, who knows if they hadn't gone north, would there have been more riots? Well, it's counterfactual. You can't prove it. But the fact that there were no more draft riots seems to indicate the idea of cowing the troublemakers with bayonets worked.
But there was no more draft in New York City after that.
Well, they suspended it for a time, but then they resumed it. And that was part of the logic, as Lincoln said, we have to get the draft going again. Because not only are the casualties continuing to mount, those 3-year enlistments are going to expire. And if those guys go home, and we think they will, that's a lot of strength that we're going to have to rebuild, and nobody's volunteering anymore, understandably enough. Now, it turned out the 3-year men don't all go home. The Federals find a way to induce them to stay for the most part. But it's one of the things about Mine Run, Meade's decision not to launch what would have been basically a suicidal attack is one of the best things that he ever does, because if there had been another Fredericksburg-style defeat at Mine Run, it's probable all those 3-year guys at that point, the ones who were still alive, would have said, we're done. But he doesn't kill them, and so they are alive, and they're not demoralized so that they wind up re-enlisting. Any other questions?
You know, you talk about water. A lot of people don't realize, you know, you're talking about wintertime. If you don't have a controlled retreat going across, you know, shallow fords or pontoons, you know, it's demoralizing. And it ruins all their powder.
It was the Confederates, when they retreated over the Rapidan, they had a pontoon bridge at Barnett's Ford that Hill used, but Ewell's men had to ford the river. And they did it, but one of the sergeants who was with it said that when you stepped into the water, it was like a knife cut off your foot. And then as you went deeper in, it's like progressively slicing off pieces of your leg. And when they stopped and they rolled up their pant legs and they took off their socks and their shoes, when they got to the other side, the men were so numb, they couldn't put it back on. And so they had to march them a mile inland to get the circulation going again, and then get off and build giant bonfires to let everybody warm up. And obviously the men who tried to swim the Rappahannock after the battle, a lot of them die because you get in that cold water and it constricts your blood vessels and your muscles don't work anymore and you drown. Some guys made it, and you know they were exhausted and weren't worth very much after they got over. But the idea of that unfordable river behind you and the massive Federals in front of you, and the fact that you were someplace where you could not be easily reinforced and from which you could not easily retreat. So the psychology of what's going on for the Confederates is critical. If this attack had not been made in the dusk and finished at night, then you could have counterbalanced that. You could see what was coming at you. You realize 2 whole corps, 2 whole divisions aren't, and then the Confederate line would have probably held. So Russell came up with a good plan. He was able to execute it with great gallantry. His subordinates did really good fighting, as did his troops. And it was fortunate that they launched it at the time of day that they did. That wasn't planned, that was circumstantial, but taking advantage of the circumstances is often the key to battlefield success. Any other questions? Those are good ones. Well, thank you. I appreciate you giving me so much of your evening. I hope you enjoyed it. And hopefully sometime late next year, Volume 4 on Mine Run will come out and we'll complete the set.
Well, I've got a backup sort of question.
Okay.
Of course, I showed up thinking that maybe this was on Whopping Heights, which obviously it's not. Were you here and gave a
Yes.
presentation on that? And
Yes.
would it be found on YouTube?
So, is there one on YouTube? That was before the pandemic and everybody wasn't
Yeah.
filming everything.
They-
You
I
filmed
did
Bristow.
one. I
Did
did
you film
Bristow.
Whopping
Yeah.
I
Heights?
don't recall.
Oh, I don't know that you did. I have recently for a Civil Roundtable, I've done that presentation, and they recorded it and it's up somewhere. I can try and find it and email you the link and to share it. Yeah, it's out there somewhere. I don't know if you go searching for it that you'll find it, because it's probably Civil Roundtable, something or another. But yeah, it's out there somewhere. That's a really, really cool
That
fight.
was Major Simpson.
His great moment of glory.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He saved the day with his regiment. Absolutely. Yeah.
That was the only time Warren Rifles fought as a unit on Warren County soil.
Yeah, great story. First book. The
Lived
first
here all
book in
my
the
life and
series.
Didn't know about it until I saw the article in the share.
Right over the hill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's history all around us that we're not aware of, and sometimes it just happens by surprise that we learn about it. Yeah. Well, again, thank you. If anybody bought a book or had one already and would like me to sign it, I'm more than happy to do that.